Hello everyone. Welcome to recorderacer.net, June 22nd, 2023 podcast, videocast. We're going to review a couple of things in this session and we're going to try some new things. I'm going to mention some of the blog articles on recorderacer.net that have been republished, and we're going to put a list of those articles below. We're also going to break out the different segments of the video with their timestamps so that somebody doesn't need to listen to the whole thing if there's a chapter or a subchapter they want to zip in on. And other than that, I'm just going to explain what the past week has been like and what the Governor's Board of Pardons has been up to. And then also try to cover some questions and announce some upcoming features. So, my name's Mark Walmer. I'm an attorney in Lancaster County with 35 years of experience. I don't go to court anymore. I don't argue with judges or district attorneys or other attorneys anymore. My practice is exclusively limited to filing pardons and expungements. The way that process starts is when somebody requests to have their record researched or analyzed. And once I look at a record, I can tell what can be cleared through the use of pardons and expungements. The expungement is what actually clears the record. It follows one process that's very set. It's very well understood. A pardon is needed for every misdemeanor or felony conviction, and it can only be expunged after it has been pardoned by the governor, after it has been voted on by the Governor's Board of Pardons, which is 5 individuals that spend a lot of time and energy actually reviewing and researching these records. The good news is that the Governor's Board has been recommending over 80% of the pardon applications that they review. So I still believe that Pennsylvania 2023 is the right place and the right time to have Pennsylvania records researched and analyzed to see what can be cleared and when. And the Pardon Board is just doing great. They have hired more personnel. They are reviewing more applications. They are streamlining their process. They're getting ready to launch their process online. And we are also in the process of asking everybody to support the budget increase, which would increase the Board of Pardons budget, I believe, by 25%. And they need this because the more budget they have, the more people they employ, the more records they review, the more pardons are granted, the more freedom is returned to people who have been suffering from unemployment, loss of education. Recently, I learned the housing opportunities. If you have a felony conviction, you have trouble getting Section 8 housing. And so part of the unfairness of the system is the fact that not only does it make it harder for you to get a job, and not only are you going to get paid less money once you have a criminal conviction, but then also it's going to be hard for you to find housing. Like, there is no more debilitating thing that can happen to a person than to pick up one or more criminal convictions that are used against them, making it harder for them to get education, housing, and employment. So that is not the last time you're going to hear me say that. So I want to start by telling you, this is the 22nd, last week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, the Board of Pardons held what they call public sessions. So these are people who had already received 2 out of 5 votes and were invited to do a presentation in front of the Board of Pardons. So I'm going to stop and just back that up for a quick overview. Once somebody files a pardon application, it's about a 2-year process. After the first year, you're probably going to be interviewed by an auditor with the parole and probation office to verify the facts in your application and double check it with some current information. About 9 months after that, if you're lucky, you receive an invitation to do a public presentation. You have to get 2 votes out of the 5 board members to get to this point. At the public presentation, the board asks you if you will answer questions for them, and everyone says yes. And then the questions are asked. There's 5 board members. The different board members have different kinds of questions. They usually ask somewhere between no questions and maybe 10 or 12 minutes. During the past 3 days of public session reviews last week, they averaged 7.7 minutes per candidate. So no questions for some and maybe 10 to 15 minutes for others. Actually, a couple of them went over 20 minutes or a half an hour. The more complicated the case, the more questions you're going to answer. If any of your crimes were caused by drug and alcohol addictions, they're going to want to know how long you've been clean, when you had your last drink, how you stay strong in your recovery, and things of that sort. And good answers obviously help you get the votes you need. What you're looking for is 3 out of the 5 board members. The board Wednesday morning reviewed about 30 applications. They took a very brief break, came back, and voted so that we could hear who was recommended to the governor for a pardon from the first 30. They then took a very short recess and came back and heard another 30 cases. This took place between about 1:15 and 4:30. Actually, they ran over all these days. They were working until 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. And again, after the 30 people are interviewed for an average of about 7 minutes each, they take a brief break, they come back, they call the vote, and then you find out how many of those 30 are recommended to the governor. They did the same thing Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, and Friday afternoon. And I sat through most, if not all, of these presentations because my practice is exclusively focused on helping people file pardons and expungements and knowing what the board is thinking, what they're asking questions about, what they care about, and then also adding to that by watching the vote and seeing who is being recommended and who isn't being recommended. I can sort of go back into the video of the person who is being interviewed, and you can see where the interview went south, as we call it. You can see where somebody who wasn't prepped for their presentation maybe didn't take responsibility for their crime, or they acted like they were entitled to this forgiveness and pretty much demanding that the board should grant them a pardon. I know in one of the cases, the pardon board, who is allowed to ask you anything they want, started to ask a young lady about a traffic offense from a year or two earlier and why she was doing 90 and a 65. And unfortunately, this young lady, instead of just telling them what happened with that ticket, what she was late for, why she was speeding, she got offended and said, "Why are you even asking me about that?" And it didn't come off. I mean, right or wrong, what the pardon board wants to see is that if they grant you forgiveness for your crime, that they can feel assured that no more criminal conduct occurs. And somebody that's speeding 90 instead of doing 65 is definitely at an increased chance of having an accident. Doesn't mean you can't have traffic violations, no. But what they're looking for is respect for the law, respect for the process, respect for your recovery, your rehabilitation. And that's what they're looking for. So at the end of 3 days, the board had reviewed over 120 cases, and they had recommended over 80% of them. That was very heartening. This is the right time and the right place to file for a pardon in Pennsylvania. So that's the good news. One of the things that you're going to see below, I think we mentioned it earlier, is we're going to list the blog articles that have been republished and redone for 2023. Also, if people like these videos, I would like them to subscribe because we're going to be putting out more and more videos. And I don't actually know how much I could watch videos about pardons and expungements because they're the only 2 services I do. But we do want to have someone on to talk about how to read and analyze a criminal history. I want to invite somebody from the Pennsylvania State Police to come down and do a presentation, present him with some records and some questions and interview them. The state police are always very informative. And we will have some other businesses and other people on the podcast in the future. We would also like to start gathering questions in order to sit here during these podcasts and actually review questions from individuals about, well, what about this? What about that? I get questions from recorderacer.net. I get some comments on my videos that I may or may not be able to respond to. But we are looking forward to actually being able to gather questions in a way so that if you submitted a question, that it would be answered within 2 to 4 weeks. All right, so as I was sitting through the 120 presentations, and as I was realizing that over 80% of the presentations were being recommended to the governor, and pause here because when the governor receives a recommendation, Governor Shapiro, I believe, will be very good at issuing appropriate pardons, hopefully within about 3 to 6 months from when the record was recommended. But then every one of those pardons is going to need an expungement. And so with seeing so many pardons being recommended to the governor by the board, I thought, I had my clients call me. I had several that went through a hearing in the past 3 days last week. And every one of them said, can I pay for the expungement? And I'm like, well, actually, you need to get the pardon from the governor before we can file the expungement. They're like, Mark, I want to pay you for the expungement, so when I get that pardon, all you need to do is file it. So I started thinking, I realized there is a benefit there. So we are going to be announcing and also changing the website so that not only my clients, but anybody who is going to be receiving a pardon from the governor, we're discounting our expungement prices by 10%. And so if somebody wants to prepay for that expungement, as soon as we get the pardon or they get the pardon, we'll be prepared to file an expungement in the county where the conviction was at a 10% discount. And so for Lancaster County, that is usually a $759 flat rate for an expungement. I think it comes out to $683. Most other counties are $859 and Philadelphia is $959. But if you simply take 10% off of those, if you prepay that, that would cover everything that needs to be handled in the generation and filing of an expungement hearing. And if someone, for whatever reason, doesn't get the pardon from the governor, say within 6 months, I think he's going to issue them quicker than that. But if he doesn't issue a pardon within 6 months, we'll simply give 100% of a rebate back to the client so that when we do get the pardon again, they can pay the same flat rate. But this is a way of knowing that your expungement is covered, and also knowing that you can sort of capitalize on some of the excitement that comes from people knowing that they received maybe 5 yes votes out of 5 board members and saying, I want to be ready for the next step. I've been waiting for this 2 to 3 years, and now I got recommended. This is going to be great. Can I prepay for an expungement from Record Eraser? Yes, you may, but you're going to get a 10% discount, and you're going to get a 100% guarantee that if anything holds the pardon up, we'll just send your money back 100%. So look for news. Probably that'll end up being a bulk email as well as possibly a special video all unto itself. And that's just an incentive to help people stay stoked about getting rid of these old criminal records. I wanted to go over a very short thing, but it's just about the process that happens. This is the process that needs to happen for anybody that wants to clear their record, as well as the process that we follow at Record Eraser whenever anybody contacts us. There's always a discrete, finite number of steps that have to be followed in logical order, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're using Record Eraser. And I'm setting up pages to help people do that, but I just wanted to explain it because It can be a complicated process, but it always follows the same format for us. Step 1, record researcher. Record researcher is the part, or record research is the part where we have a first name, last name, date of birth, email address, and phone number. If you put that into the form on recorderaser.net, we will research your record and find a record. Once we look at it, we can tell what can be cleared and when. If you need an expungement, we can quote that. If you need a pardon, we can quote that. So that's the first thing you need to do, is have a record to look at, and then step 2, have it analyzed. These records can be hard to read. There's a variety of terms that are used that aren't American English, and even people that are trained in some of this. I've been recently contacted by HR departments that just don't understand the legal language that's on a lot of these court records. So the second part is, once you have a record, it needs to be analyzed to see what can be cleared and when through the use of the pardon and the expungement. If it's determined that an expungement is needed, then the expungement petition can simply be prepared and filed. That's a separate thing. It's quicker, 3 to 6 months. It's easier. It's in the Court of Common Pleas. It's less expensive than a pardon. A pardon is what is needed to remove misdemeanor and felony convictions. If somebody retains us, or if somebody wants to do their own pardon, the first step is to write off to the clerk of courts in the county of conviction for 5 specific documents that are needed by the Board of Pardons. And so that is the third step, is writing to the clerk of courts to get official criminal records. The next step is step 4, and this is where the candidate or the applicant or you give input by writing your, what we call Section 3 and Section 4 answers. Section 3 is 150 to 200 words explaining about how you were involved in the crime back in the day. And if you have multiple crimes, you write multiple Section 3s. Section 4 is where you explain, maybe in 500 or 600 words, everything you've done in your life since then, and everything that helps to convince the Board of Pardons that you're a good candidate and that you are not likely to relapse or go back to any kind of criminal behavior. If you received any training, any certificates, or even got married and settled down and raised children and did all these good things, that goes into your Section 4. And that's step 4. Once the pardon is filed, and I call this step 5, we track the pardon. And so if the Board of Pardons needs any more information or clarification, they contact us. We take care of the clarification and stay in touch with them on a weekly basis. And we track the pardon over the course of the next year or two until the board is ready to review it. Along that path, you could need to be prepared for hearings. The first hearing, about a year after the pardon is filed, it's not actually a hearing, it's a phone interview by an auditor with the Government of Pennsylvania, with the Office of Probation and Parole. It's an auditor that works with the Board of Pardons in order to vet the details in the pardon application, as well as ask questions about whether there's been any recent activity with the police, are you employed, and just generic things of that sort. About a year after that auditor's investigation, give or take 3 or 4 months, we're hoping that you would get invited to a public presentation. I spend time with all of my clients before the public presentation, not really grilling them, but getting them prepared to answer the kinds of questions I think they might be asked. And I think that preparation for the public session is really invaluable because, well, look, last week alone I listened to 120 of these. So I know many of the questions that the board is going to be concerned with, and you shouldn't be hearing them for the first time when you're on a Zoom call with the Board of Pardons who is asking you questions about your application. Finally, when you get the pardon from the governor, you're going to need an expungement, and so expungement preparation is the last part of the process. It's actually step 7, but whether you see videos from us or whether you see various pages on our website, they all have to do with this process of record researching, record analysis, record requesting, pardon preparation, pardon tracking, hearing preparation, and filing the expungement. At the end of all of those steps, you have a clean record. You're good to go. Thank you.